Hi all the students, today we are going to study frames. So just like in any HTML page, in frames also you have the HTML head and title tags, and so after the head tag we have always seen that we start with the body tag, but here we will not have the body tag. So whenever we are using frames, instead of the body tag we have the frame set tag, and the frame set tag has an opening and a closing delimiter. So within this frame set tag you will give your frames. Okay, now basically frames are allowing you to divide the screen into rows and columns as per your choice. You want to have 2 rows, you can divide your screen into 2 rows. You want to have 2 columns, you can divide your screen into 2 columns. You want to have 2 rows and 4 columns, you can divide your screen into 2 rows and 4 columns. So depending upon your requirement and your liking, with the help of frames you can divide your browser screens into as many frames as you want. Now if you want to divide the browser screen into rows, so for that I have the attribute frame set rows. So I say that my first row occupies 30% of the screen space, right? So it will occupy 30% of the screen space, and then I say that remaining space is for the other row. So my first row in this case will occupy 30% of the screen space, and rest of the screen space, that is 70%, will be for the other row. Now if in case I want to divide this particular row which is occupying 30% of the screen space further into 2 columns, so for that immediately after writing frame set rows I will write frame set columns. So that means these columns are within this first row. So this I say frame set columns equals to, now I want this particular row to be divided into 2 frames of equal size. So I say columns equals to 50% and 50%. So this particular row will have 2 columns occupying 50% of the screen space by each column. Okay. So this is done using the frame set tag and the rows and columns attributes of the frame set tag. Now I will give the actual frame. So then comes the frame tag. Now first frame is for this particular first column, right? For this row, the first column, that is this which is occupying the first 50% space, this frame src is by default for that. So I say frame src is equals to first dot html. Now let us see if I have any file named first.html. Yes, I have. So I will give a valid name only. So src basically means source. So that means the source of this particular frame, which is the first column of the first row, is first.html. So whatever file name I give here will be loaded in the first column of the first row, right? Then again for the second column of the first row I give the same tag. I say frame src, and this time I want the source to be fourth.html. So this fourth.html file will be loaded in the second column of the first row. So I save the changes. Frame set tag I have already closed. So I save my changes. Now there are 2 frame set tags over here, but you close the frame set tag only for the first frame set. So this is a nested frame. So for the first frame set tag only I will close the frame set, not for the second one. So I save the changes. Then I open this particular page in my browser. So I will refresh my browser. So let's see why it is not okay. So my frame set rows equals to 30% and remaining space. Then this 30% for, I say frame set columns equals to 50% and 50%. Alright, so my frame source, the first source of my frame is file first.html, and the second source for the second frame is fourth.html, and then I close the frame set tag. So this is all okay. I will refresh my browser. I'll try opening it again. Open with Google Chrome. Okay, this time the same problem is happening. I will save the changes first of all. I saved this change. Now I will refresh my browser. Open it. Let's refresh the browser. The code is absolutely correct. There is nothing wrong with the code over here. So my source is first.html and fourth.html. I have closed the frame set tag. I have closed the HTML tag also. So there is no issue with that. Let's check it again. It's not opening. So I'll try and copy the name as it is. It is first.html. Then this one is again fourth.html. Although the it is not case sensitive, we know that our HTML is not case sensitive, but still I'll try changing the case because there is nothing wrong with the code here. So frame set rows, columns, src, that is the source, then frame, then frame. And let me check the spelling. Frame set is correct, frame set is correct here also. Frame, and then frame set. Now let us see if it works. See, so there was some spelling mistake basically which I could not notice. That is why the frames were not loading. So maybe after I changed the case, I wrote the spelling correctly. Though it is not case sensitive, I am not supporting the fact that it is case sensitive at all. You can write it in small case, you can write it in uppercase, that does not matter. There was a spelling mistake basically which I could not find out, and when I wrote it again in caps lock, I corrected the spelling. So this is what happened. So you can clearly see that okay, what I was telling you, that my first row is occupying 30% of the screen space. So this is the 30% of the screen space. Then this first row is divided into two columns which are occupying 50% and 50% space of this row. So 50% is occupied by this particular frame and 50% is occupied by this particular frame. Then the file first.html is loaded in the first frame. This is first.html, and then the file fourth.html is loaded in the second frame. This is fourth.html. Alright, so this is how the frames look. Now since first.html is a big file, so by default it is having a scroll bar like this. Okay, now what about the remaining rows which are occupying, what about the remaining row which is occupying 70% of the screen space, which is the remaining screen space? So for that again I say frame set columns equals to 50%. Now this columns is not immediately after this rows. So that means this is a separate column. This column belongs to this row, which is occupying 70% of the screen space. So that means I have, for this row also, I have divided it into two columns occupying 50% and 50% of the screen space. So basically in the second row also I'll be having two frames occupying 50% of the screen space by each frame. Now we have to give the source also for these frames. So I say, again I give the same code, frame src. Here I say the src is faculty.html, and here the source is faculty1.html. So faculty1 will be loaded in the first column of the second row, and faculty1 will be loaded in the second column of the second row. The order in which they are written, they are loaded in the same order. So now I save it, I refresh my browser. So basically the frame set columns equals to 50% and 50%. That means the second row has been divided into two equal columns or two equal frames, and then in the first column I load file faculty.html, in the second column I load file faculty1.html. Okay, now one mistake that we are doing here is that this frame set tag will first of all come here, because this frame set tag is closed here itself. Okay, for the first row, this frame set is for the first row, and then I close it after we are done with the first row. So then comes the new frame set tag for the second row. So this also has to be closed after the second, after we are done defining with these frame src tags for the second row also. So I give a frame set tag here also, rather I would give it a little up. So like this I give it, and then I refresh my browser. So you see I gave frame set tag, and then so you can see that this particular, the remaining area, that is the 70% area which was occupied by the second row, this row was further divided into two columns, each occupying 50% and 50% of the screen space, and then this column, basically this column was occupied by faculty.html, and the second column was occupied by faculty1.html, and then the frame set tag was given, right? So the moment a row is done, we are done with defining the frame src of this particular row, we close the frame set tag here only. And then for the second row, when we said frame set columns, because row was already defined, we gave the columns, and then we close the frame set tag for this row here, right? And we close the frame set tags for the rows only, not for the column. That means frame set, if it is opening twice in a nested manner, it will close only once. Here also rows were already given, so we gave for this row, for the remaining row 70% one, we gave frame set columns here, and then we close them here, right? So this is how you close the frame set tags, and then you can see clearly two rows and two columns each for two rows. This is what we have done, and then four files respectively loaded in each column or each frame. So this is how you can create frames, as many frames as you want. So this is basically two rows and two columns. Now we can do some modifications to see how it works. Let us say I want the row to occupy 60% of the screen space and remaining for the other row. Now let's see the changes. See, so now this row is occupying 60% of the screen space, and remaining 40 is occupied by the second row, and rest the columns are still occupying 50% and 50% of the screen space. I can do some changes with the column also. I say this column should occupy 40% of the screen space, and this column should occupy 60% of the screen space. So I save the changes, I refresh my browser. So I can see that this column is occupying 40% screen space and this is occupying 60% screen space. Similarly, here I say that I want this column, for the second row, I want the first column to occupy 60% screen space and second column to occupy 40% of the screen space. So I save the changes, I refresh my browser, and here you go. For the second row, the first column occupies 60% screen space and the second column occupies 40% screen space. Now instead of 2 rows and 4 columns in each, 2 rows and 2 columns in each row, that means total 4 frames. Instead of having 4 frames, I can have just 1 frame also. I can have just 3 frames also. So for this, I can say that this is just, I say that for the second row I have only 1 column, right? So frame set columns equals to, it completely occupies 100% of the screen space. So basically this occupies 100% of the screen space. Let's refresh the browser. So of course, when it is occupying 100%, I do not need a frame source also here. So now this there is only 1 column in the second row and that is occupying 100% of the screen space, and the file which it is having is faculty.html. So I save the changes, I refresh my browser, and now I can clearly see I just have 3 frames. Similarly, for this also I can say that my column will occupy 100% of the screen space and I do not want any this second column, so I deleted source also. So then I save the changes. Now I refresh my browser, I can clearly see there are just 2 frames, right? So this is how you can give as many frames as you want in your web pages. Now there is one important attribute for this, which is your margin height and margin width. So basically your margin height specifies the amount of white space or blank space that is left at the top and bottom. So when I say margin height, now look at the browser right now. There is no margin at the top and bottom, right? There is no margin at the top and bottom. It is very close to the top and bottom. So now I say margin height, margin, margin height is equal to, so I'll give this attribute before the source attribute, right? So my margin height equals to 20. So the moment I say margin height equals to 20, let's refresh the browser. So right now you can clearly see there is no space at the top and no space at the bottom either. Now refresh the browser. You clearly have space at the top also and you have space at the bottom also, right? Now for this frame also I do the same. I say margin height equals to 20. So the moment I say margin height equals to 20, it will leave this amount of space at the top and bottom of this particular frame. So right now you can see there is no space at the top, and at the bottom there is space because there is nothing written. So I refresh. Now there is space at the top. Okay, now we margin width attribute. Margin width attribute leaves blank or white space at the left and right of the frame. So I use the margin width attribute. I say margin width equals to 20 and I save. Then I refresh my browser. So right now, before refreshing, let me show you that here there is no blank space. Before this A, there is no blank space, and after, of course, there is, because there is nothing written. So we'll see the changes. Now you see this A is shifted here, there is blank space at the left, and there at right there was no requirement because there is already a lot of blank space. Okay, now for this second frame also we'll see the margin width attribute. So I give the same attribute for the second row also, and I say margin width equals to 20. So the moment I say margin width equals to 20, I refresh my browser. Here you see you have margin at the left, and right there was already. So this is how you can leave blank spaces at the top, bottom, left and right of the frames. Now what if I want to load my frame? I have a hyperlink in this frame, and I want to, when I click on the hyperlink, I want to load that particular document in this frame. How do I do that? That is possible with the help of the name attribute. That is, when you click on a particular frame and then you do not want the hyperlink to open in the same frame, rather you want it to open in the another frame, for that you have the name attribute. That means you want to open a new document from hyperlink in a specific frame and not in the same frame in which that hyperlink existed. So in this case your HTML file will open in another frame, so the frame needs to be named, because you need to tell in which frame you want to open that particular hyperlink. So for that you have the frame name attribute. So how do you give the frame name attribute? Okay, now first of all, let us say I divide my screen into two columns. I am not interested in rows. I say frame set columns equals to 100, 50% and 50%. So my screen space is divided into two columns which are occupying 50% of the screen space. Okay. Then I give the frame tag, right? So here this frame set will not come here because that is the same column. So frame set will come only once because there is only one. I am dividing the screen space into two columns for the same row. So for the same row there will be only one frame set. You have the number of frame sets as many rows you have. So here you do not have more than one row. The same row is divided into two columns. So that means you are having only one row which is divided into two columns occupying 50% and 50% of the screen space, and hence the frame set tag will close only one. Okay. So now I say frame set columns equals to 50%, 50%. There is only one row. I have not divided the screen into more than one row, and that one row is divided into two columns occupying 50%, 50% of the screen space. So for that I'll have two frame source, because two columns, that means two frames. So two frame sources will be required. So again I load the same pages, but now I also give one more attribute. Now let us forget the margin width and margin height attribute. You can keep them if you want to, but I do not want to have too many attributes, that will be confusing. So we'll focus on the attribute that I want to tell you right now. So I say frame name. Now I give a name to this particular frame. I say part. Alright, this is frame part and its source is first.html. And the second frame, the name of the second frame is main. Now I do not want any data to be loaded here. I want that when I click, when I open when this file is loaded in this particular frame, and when I click on the hyperlink of this file, then that file which opens in this particular frame. So here in this case I do not need to give any source in that case, because initially it will be empty, right? And when I click on the hyperlink of this file, then a new document will load in this frame. So the first frame or the first column is given the name part, and the second column is given, or the second frame is given the name main. Okay, now my frame set is closed. Okay, now first.html, it needs to have a hyperlink to be able to show you. So I will open the file first.html. This is first.html. Okay, now in first.html I basically delete all this data and I say a href equals to which file. Ahref equals to, now which file do I want to give? Let us say I give the file fourth.html, right? So I give the name of this particular file. So href is fourth.html and then I close it. So then my hyperlink is visit my site and then I close the anchor tag. That's it. So now I've saved the changes. I close my fourth.html. So this is my fourth.html file which is having a hyperlink So this is my first.html which is having a hyperlink which is visit my site, and when I click on visit my site, this document fourth.html will open. Now I want this fourth.html not to open in the same frame. I want it to open in another frame. So for that I will give the name of that frame in which I want to open fourth.html when I click on this hyperlink visit my site. Alright, so now frame name equals to main. Now I will say specify in which particular frame it has to open. So I say target. Alright, so I will give the name of the frame here. So href is fourth.html, and where do I want it to open? I say target equals to which frame? I want to open it in the main frame, the frame which is named main. So I copy the name here itself, from here itself, and then I say target equals to main. This is the name of the frame. So now when in the first frame I will click on the hyperlink visit my site, the fourth.html will open in the second frame which is named as main. Now it is opening in that frame because I have given it the name, because I have told the browser that the target is main. That means this file will now open in this particular target which is the frame, and main is the name of that frame. So now let's save the changes like this and refresh my browser. Right now, for now, like this. So I will basically close this and open this page again. Right, so the source of first frame is first.html. I will save the changes first of all. So basic.html, I save the changes, then I open it again in the browser, open with Google Chrome. See, this is what I did. What did I do? I did not divide the screen into any rows. I kept just one row, and that one row I divided into two columns like this. So you can clearly see that my screen has been divided into two columns or two frames. Then the source of my first frame was first.html. This first frame, the source is first.html. So first.html is loaded here, which consists of only a hyperlink visit my site. And now I want, when I click on visit my site, the page does not open in this frame. Otherwise, conventionally, if I click here, the page will open here only. But now I want that when I click here, the page loads in the second frame. See, I'll show you the difference also. If I remove this particular in first.html, if I remove this code target equals to main, so you will see that now I refresh my browser. Now when I click on visit my site, so the hyperlink, when I clicked on the hyperlink, I was navigated to a new document in the same frame itself. But I don't want this. I want that when I click on that hyperlink visit my site, this particular page opens in this second frame. So for this I write here, for this in the file first.html I give target. So now I say that target is another frame and not the same frame. So target is which frame? Main frame. The frame which is named main, which is the second frame basically. Now I refresh my browser. Okay, now you look at the difference. I'll click on visit my site. I save the changes. First of all, I did not save the changes, so that is why it could not refresh. So for first.html also I will save the changes. Now I refresh my browser. So now when I click on visit my site, see, now it is opening on the target frame which is named as main. So now when I click here, the new document is loaded in the second frame. Alright, so whenever you want that, when you click on a hyperlink and the page loads in the other frame and not in the same frame, then you use the attribute target, and within target you give the name of that frame in which you want to open the new document. And how do you do the naming of the frame? You just, after the frame tag, you just give the name attribute and name it as whatever name you want to give, right? So that is why the second frame, for the second frame I did not use the src attribute, because initially I did not want to load anything onto that frame. I just gave it a name because I knew that when this file opens, and in this file when I click on this hyperlink, it will open in this empty frame which is named as name, which is named as main, right? So this is how you use the name attribute of a frame, and this is how you can click on a hyperlink in one frame and open the new document in another frame. So this is all for frames. I hope you have understood.